All right. So thank you everybody for joining us today in our TA session or webinar for our Restore, Reinvest, and Renew NOFO Notice of Funding Opportunity for SFY State Fiscal Year 2025. This represents our third Notice of Funding Opportunity for the R3 program. I'll talk a little bit more about the program and the NOFO itself throughout this webinar. Before I start, I want to do a few introductions and then a little bit of just kind of ground rules for the presentation. My name is Mitchell Troop. I'm one of the grants directors at ICEJA and have been working closely with the R3 NOFO for a few years now. I'd also like to introduce Aisha Williams, who is our R3 program manager, Maureen Brennan, who's our R3 technical assistant specialist. Adriana Perez is the, and I'm sorry, folks, if I mess up titles. Adriana Perez is our GATA. Adriana, can you jump in and remind me of your title? I'm sorry. I'm so sorry.
Sure. Chief Accountability Officer.
Chief Accountability Officer. I was blanking. Kelly Pashlik is with our Office of General Counsel, and then Lauren Weissner's with our Research and Analysis Unit. Adriana and Lauren and Kelly are all here in case there are specific questions that they can answer, and then Aisha and Maureen work closely with the R3 program, so they can assist with that as well. As far as kind of general ground rules, I will be kind of going through this, all of this information. It is extensive. There's a lot of information to cover. If you do have questions, any attendees have questions, please feel free to put your question in the chat. We will pause at certain points throughout the presentation to answer those questions. Any questions that arise now or after, you'll be given an email address that you can use to send questions to if you don't think of them till after the presentation, or if you'd rather send your question to an email rather than put it into the chat, which is visible to anyone on the webinar at this moment. I'll give you that email address a little bit later, but all questions that are asked at this webinar or at any point during the NOFO posting period until the deadline for asking questions arrives will be answered in the venue that it's submitted, and also publicly once a week on our website. That's to ensure that there's fairness, that all the information is shared to anyone who might be interested in the answer to those questions. I think everyone is muted, and so I do encourage you again to feel free to put those questions in the chat, and we'll pause now and then to answer them. There are some questions that we won't be able to answer. We can't advise you on how to craft your application or on anything that might give you a benefit over other applicants, but we can help you if you need to know more information about the rules of the NOFO, about some of the allowability or other areas that are parts of the NOFO that we can clarify. So today in this webinar, we'll be talking about the R3 program overall, such as the program values, the zones and funding regions and how they interact with the NOFO. We'll be talking about how much funding is available and the range of that funding. We'll talk about the application structure in terms of collaboratives or single applicants. And we'll talk about eligibility requirements for applicants. We'll also discuss program design, allowable expenses, and we'll discuss tips for writing both your narrative and other pieces of the application that you may want to know as you're thinking of applying for this NOFO. We'll talk about how to submit the NOFO in our Amplifund system. Once it's submitted, how it's scored and how awards are selected, and the timeline that you can expect as an applicant for this NOFO. So those of you that have been a part of an application process for R3 in the past may remember this. The R3 program, or again, as it's known, Restore, Reinvest, and Renew. I'll be saying R3 because it's much easier to do so. The R3 program was established with the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act, with the legalization of adult use cannabis, and with the idea that the intention of Illinois lawmakers that passed the Cannabis Regulation and Tax Act was that the legalization of cannabis in Illinois would be an equitable process, that it would recognize some of the disinvestment and strain that specific communities throughout the state had borne due to the drug's status as an illegal drug, and incarceration and so on that happened as partly as a war on drug, as a result of the war on drugs. Therefore, a portion of the tax revenues from the sale of adult use cannabis was directed to a trust fund that is used to deliver grants throughout the state of Illinois and the regions most hardest hit by those factors. And so because of this, we've got some specific program values that kind of underpin all of our programming that we really intend for all of our grantees and all of our programming to support. One, we're focused on community-driven service provision. That means that, as you know, R3 doesn't have a lot of top-down direction as to the specific types of programs or of outcomes that should be sought by grantees. Rather, for the most part, we want our applicants in these NOFOs to identify for us in the application what their community needs and how they're best situated to support that. So we really want to give the communities and the applicants in those communities the opportunity to tell us what is needed in their communities. We're driven by opportunity. We want to make sure that organizations that maybe haven't had the resources or the opportunities to receive grant funding from the state do get that opportunity through this process. We're interested in capacity building of smaller organizations to build their ability to continue and to expand their services. We're focused on equity to make sure that there's a fair playing field for organizations to compete for this funding, and collaboration so that organizations within communities and across communities with specific focuses might be able to collaborate for the benefit of our communities and for the benefit of their service provision. One of the things that the legislation laid out were eligible R3 zones for funding. And there's a process by which ICEJA and the R3 board needed to go through to develop those zones. I won't get into it now, but all of the information that was used is available at the website at r3.illinois.gov/eligibility. Only programs that serve R3 eligible zones are eligible, or R3 eligible zones or residents of those zones are eligible for this funding. So one of your first steps, if you're interested in this NOFO, is to go to that map at r3.illinois.gov/eligibility. It's a dynamic map. You can look up addresses, you can zoom in, zoom out, and identify if the area that you want to provide services is one of those color-coded shaded areas on the map. Some R3 zones are considered to be high risk and are given more points on the application. So as you review the application, you'll see where that comes in. Zones and high risk indicators were selected based on the data, which again is located on that same website. So it's got that a table, and it's got that interactive map that I encourage everyone to view if you're interested in this funding. We have also, in order to ensure statewide coverage of our funds, we have split Illinois into 12 different funding regions. Each of those funding regions is a separate pool of competition, which means that organizations applying for funding, say in the southern region of Illinois, are not competing with organizations applying for funding in the Chicago West region or in the central region of Illinois. That way we ensure that there's funding split throughout the state, and funding in each of those regions is based on the percentage of the total R3 zone population within those regions. So we've divided up the funding proportionally by that population percentage. The regions are also identified as color-coded areas on the map at r3.illinois.gov/eligibility. There is also a region map that's located within the NOFO instructions. If you are able to access those on ICEJA's website or on the r3.illinois.gov website, that will be located as Appendix C in the NOFO instruction document. The other way we divide funding up for this NOFO is through tiers of competition. This is in an effort to make sure that smaller and emerging organizations also are given that opportunity to apply and receive funding, even though they may be competing against larger organizations for that funding that are more established and have been around longer and might have more resources. So we've established tiers. Tier 1 is an organization with less than 2 years of operation as an organization. Tier 2 is less than $2 million annual budget or less than 5 years of operation. And Tier 3 is $2 million annual budget or more and more than 5 years of operation. And we've organized this so that Tier 1 gets 25% of the funding, Tier 2 gets 50%, and Tier 3 gets 25%. There's a table that is located also in the NOFO, in the appendices, and the table will provide all applicants with funding ranges based on their tier and region. So by referring to that table in the application, in the NOFO instructions, you'll see exactly what the range is that your organization could potentially apply for. Just as with the regions, applicants in different tiers do not compete with one another. The competition exists only within those tiers. So we'll have separate pools of competition for Tier 1 within each region, for Tier 2 and for Tier 3. Appendix C, as I said, of the NOFO instructions contains a table that identifies those tiers and regions to help you determine the appropriate funding level. We have $30 million available for this NOFO. As I said, award ranges will vary by tier and region, so it's important to consult the NOFO instructions for that table to see what your award range might be based on your organization. You can select your requested amount within that range. So just as an example, if the range for your region and tier is between $25,000 on the low end and $100,000 on the high end, you may select $25,000 or $100,000 or anything in between. But then your application needs to align with that amount and support the request for that amount all the way through as you make that application. The lowest an application can request in line with my example is $25,000. And then the highest will vary by NOFO region and tier. So again, I just encourage you to look at that table to see what that is. I'm going to pause to see, Maureen, I don't see any questions in the chat. Have you seen anything come in?
No, nothing's come in yet, Mitch. You're doing a great job. Oh, wait a second. We just got one.
Okay.
Will any preference be given to R3 planning grantees transitioning into service delivery?
That's a great question, Maureen. No, there is no specific preference in terms of point values given to planning grantees who transition into service delivery. However, if you did have a previous R3 or any other planning grant that allowed you to plan out your services or to better structure your services given the environment of the, where your services are provided, it's perfectly fine and encouraged for you to reference that when you're answering other questions that are related to that. So if there are questions in the NOFO that allow you to bring that experience that you have earned from that planning grant in, then you're more than able to do so. Thanks.
That's the only question I see.
All right, well, we'll move on to application structure. As with all previous R3 NOFOs, organizations may apply under two different application structures. One is kind of more of a traditional NOFO structure, which is a single organization applicant. That means that one organization applies to carry out a program under the funding opportunity. The single organization applicant must complete the entire application themselves and must be eligible to receive state funds. And that applicant must have a registered account in the GATA grantee portal. The other option is a collaborative application. This is when a group of organizations proposing one joint project combine to submit one application. Each member of that group must be eligible to receive state funds, but you're only going to have one organization that puts in their information into the AmpliFund system as the applicant to submit that application. We call that the responsible applicant, just meaning that they're responsible for submitting that application. They must have a registered account in the GATA grantee portal, but the other members of that collaborative do not need this account. Now, I want to be clear about the way that collaborative application works. You'll have one applicant that is going to be seen as the grantee of ICEJA. They're going to be the one that makes an application that makes an agreement with ICEJA for the funds if they're selected for the funds. And then the other organizations that are all part of that collaborative application will be seen as sub-recipients or sub-awards of the responsible applicant that submits the application. They do this because we need to have just one organization as party to the agreement with ICEJA. But the benefit of joining as a collaborative application is that as long as your organizations are all identified on the application, you don't need to go through your own NOFO to identify other subrecipients. So it saves a little bit if you've got a collaborative group of organizations that are all on board with the same project. If you go this route, it is important that the responsible applicant knows what their duties are, because it's a little bit more than just all being a party to the project. The responsible applicant needs to make sure they satisfy the requirements to submit the application. They would need to submit the application on behalf of the collaborative. You need to have signed linkage agreements uploaded for collaborative members in the application. And the responsible applicant will need to execute subgrant agreements with those other members. They would also need to do the duties that we set aside for anyone with subrecipients, which means they need to monitor those subrecipients. They need to pass the funds through to those subrecipients and serve as that responsible entity of the collaborative. So think about those duties as you're considering applying as a responsible applicant or as a collaborative. Now, eligibility requirements for all applicants, regardless of whether you're applying as a single organization or as the responsible applicant of a collaborative, you need to have a UEI number. That is I'm blanking, a unique entity identification number. You need to have an account with sam.gov. You need to have a grants.gov account. You need good standing status with the Illinois Secretary of State and a GATA grantee portal account. If you are a collaborative partner that is not the responsible applicant submitting the application, you need all of those except the GATA grantee portal account. That is not required if you're just a collaborative partner, but the other items are still needed just for you to be able to receive funds through the state of Illinois. This application is submitted through the Amplifund grant management system. I'm going to take a good chunk of time to cover the Amplifund grant management system. It's still fairly new in the process. We're adopting it statewide, but I want to make sure everybody knows kind of the ins and outs of that system, as it will be the only way that you're able to submit and enter your application. All applications must be completely submitted, as I said, via that grant management system. Once an application is begun, applicants will need to complete each form in the system and then submit their applications. I will go through some screenshots in a little bit to show you what that looks like. And then you'll want to make sure that the entire application, including all required uploads of documents, is complete before you submit. So you're able to get to Amplifund in a couple of different ways. One is, this is a screenshot from the R3 Restore, Reinvest, and Renew website. Those of you that might have gone there will notice that this little Coming Soon button, where I've circled in green, has now been replaced by another one that says for more information or to apply, click here. That will take you to ICEJA's page, which is here. And by finding the R3 NOFO under funding opportunities and clicking on that, you'll be directed here to this page within the Amplifund system. You can download the materials for this NOFO by clicking the download button just to the left of the green circle, or you can apply by clicking the apply button, which is circled in green. You'll need to have an account in order to do this, and so I'll walk through that in just a little bit. So in order to get access to Amplifund, you would need to register with the grantee portal at grants.illinois.gov/portal. Many organizations already have this. If you've already got funding through the state of Illinois, most likely you already have this. But if you don't, if you're new to this and you haven't done this before, that will be your first step. You would need to identify an individual who will submit the application in Amplifund, who will be the primary contact for the application. You can have more than one individual with access to and completing the components of the application. So you could have multiple people working on it, but you definitely need one person as the primary contact for the application. This link below there then will take you to that page I just showed you to complete and submit the application in Amplifund. And I should note, as people always ask, this will be on the R3 website. The slide deck will be on the R3 website, along with the recording of this webinar following the webinar. So it'll be available to everybody who wants to come back and click on the link and check this information out. So again, there's the link that'll take you to the opportunity information page that'll allow you to apply. For the website, you'll be using a public account to log in and make application in the Amplifund system. Once you're in, you'll see a few different kind of stages of the application process. You'll open up with the opportunity details, and you can see the little green dots at the top of the screen under the service delivery R3 title. Those dots will let you know the kind of the stage of the application you're at and which parts of it have been completed. So if you see up there, there's a little circle under opportunity details with a white dot inside. That means that's where we're at right now on that page. The green circle with the white check inside means that that piece has been done. So you'll see that progress as you go through the application. There are a few different parts that you'll fill out here. The project information is going to be your general information about the program. What the name of the project is, what your name of the application is, how much you're requesting, that basic information that you'll need to fill out at the very beginning. Again, I would encourage everyone to look at the table in Appendix C of the NOFO before you fill this out to give you your award range. If you request an amount beyond the official allowed award range for your tier and region, then if you are selected for funding, first of all, you may be disqualified depending on the review. And if you are selected for funding, you may only receive up to the total allowable amount for your tier and region. You won't be able to receive higher, even if you request higher. So make sure that this lines up with what the allowable award range is. The next section will be for application forms. These are all the forms that you need to complete in order to have your application be considered completed. Some of these are actually completed within the Amplifund system. Some of these are sections that you'll have to download a form, complete it separately, and then upload it to Amplifund in order for your form to be completed. That information, all of the forms that need to be uploaded are listed at the very beginning of the NOFO in an Amplifund upload checklist. So make sure as you're submitting that you do that. It's also listed within each page of Amplifund where those are located to let you know that something needs to be downloaded on that page and then uploaded in order for your application to be complete. So all of those forms, as you just saw, are completed in Amplifund under application forms. It's very important that you answer all questions and the individual parts of a question. When reviewers are looking at your application, they're going to be asking, are all parts of this question answered, and are they answered successfully, to give them an idea of whether the proposal that you're putting forward for this funding is a good proposal, is worthy of the funding that you're requesting. Please refer to program requirements and prompts before each question or sets of questions when completing your response. The information that's contextualizes those questions are all in there in Amplifund as well. You can use evaluation and scoring in the NOFO instructions as a guide, that lets you know how much each question is worth. And I will note that there are some questions that aren't worth any points, but they're still required for completing the application. That's things like that let us know what your tier and region are, for example, or other pieces of information that might not be part of the actual scoring, but are important for sorting your application or for knowing what you're going to be doing. And so those are still required to be responded to, even if they might not be worth any points in the scoring criteria. And then we'll remind you that the program narrative that you're writing should convey the need for the program, what your current efforts are, and an understanding of the implementation of what's required to carry out that program. You want to give a full, thorough picture of your program and the need for it to the application reviewers that are going to be reading the application. I'm having trouble with my While I see why my PowerPoint is blank, let me stop sharing just for a moment. I see that there are a couple of questions. Maureen, can you help me out with that, please?
Sure. There are two questions about program types. Do legal services for low-income and socially disadvantaged entrepreneurs and businesses, also known as business law services, qualify for funding under this NOFO as civil legal aid?
Let's see. So Kelly, I might put you on the spot for this one as the OGC representative here. Do you have thoughts on that, or is this something that we need to respond to later?
I do have some thoughts. I might need some clarity about the piece of what is thought of as business law, but the legal services are meant to be for individuals. So it wouldn't be legal services for a business that would be part of the civil legal services program. So it is meant to be individuals for individual services as opposed to like a business law type of service. But I don't know if there's any follow-up questions to that.
There is a second question. Is Table X on pages 38 and 39 an exhaustive list of services that are eligible as civil legal aid? We ask because we do not see any mention of legal services to low income and socially disadvantaged business in any of the listed categories, also known as business law or entrepreneurial services. So it sounds like your response is that it's not meant to be for businesses. So that's why, and that is an exhaustive list of the civil legal aid because it's designed for individuals.
Right, yeah, so it is an exhaustive list, and business law type of things wouldn't be something that would be considered. It would be like those individual type services. So does you have a business yourself personally need assistance on something under those for something a legal service for your business, then that is not something that would be eligible.
There's another question that came in. With the first round of R3 funding, there were local reviewers in the scoring process. Will that happen again with this round of reviews?
Yes. Yeah, the intention is to have community members be the primary reviewers for this opportunity. We may have some ICJA staff sort of facilitating and serving in that role to some extent, but we are actively seeking individuals throughout the state, community members, to do the review.
We have another follow-up question on the legal services. Most low-income and socially disadvantaged entrepreneurs are not organized as businesses and do business as individuals. So the individual, not a business entity, is usually the client. So would they qualify?
So they would only qualify to the extent that those services that they need are the services that are listed on there as an exhaustive list. So I don't think that the type of services that are being contemplated as business law services are the type of services that are going to be eligible under this NOFO, because it would have to be those types of services that are listed under that list. So if it's something for your business, like to incorporate your business, any, anything related to that, it's not something that would be eligible. It's really those services that are listed in that list that would be eligible under the NOFO.
That's the last question. Oops.
I think so. Oh, sorry, Maureen, did you say that was the last question?
No, another follow-up. Would business law services to entrepreneurs and socially disadvantaged businesses qualify as economic development for funding under this NOFO?
I think what I want to do, because this is getting very specific, is if you could please put that in an email and send it to cja.r3questions@illinois.gov. We will review and respond back in an email and then post it on the question and answers, because I don't want to just kind of go back and forth on this. So please put it in an email and we'll address it in that context.
And that's the last one then, Mitch.
All right, great, thank you. And I do have my screen back up, so thank you for your patience. So again, we were just talking about submitting in the Amplifund system. I'd like to remind folks that the Amplifund system times out after 20 minutes of inactivity. I'd like to note, inactivity doesn't mean that it's just sitting there without anything happening for 20 minutes. You could be typing, and unless you hit a button, that's going to count as inactivity. So we encourage you to hit save and continue, or to hit save frequently. It's also, we may encourage you to look at the questions, type your responses in like another document like Microsoft Word or something, and then paste into Amplifund if you're worried about timing out. We don't want anybody to lose 20 minutes worth of responses. And so we wanted to flag that if you don't hit a button of some sort or another, like save or save and continue, even if you're in the system typing, it may time you out. It'll give you a little alert to let you know, but we've seen it where people are typing, they get up for coffee, and by the time they come out, it's signed them out. So we want to encourage you to hit save and continue. You can always come back if you're not done with a page, but you can't recover something if you get signed out before saving. So the page here is an example of, as I said, some questions are completed within the Amplifund system. You'll see here there's a question that asks you to provide a brief 1 to 3 paragraph summary of your proposed program. And there's a box for you to enter that response. You have ability to kind of do some editing and everything within that box, but this box is where you'll enter your response. You don't need to upload anything for this answer. That answer is submitted within this page. On this one, on the other hand, there is a section where you'll need to download and then upload your performance metrics template to submit your goals and performance metrics for the project. And on a page like that, you'll see that there's a link. This one is the 2378-030124 performance metrics template.docx. That document you can click on it and download that template document, then fill it out with your information for your program, and then upload by clicking this button where the green arrow is pointing right here. So it should be a fairly simple process. It's straightforward right on that page. You download that template, you complete it, and then you go to this button and you upload it. But it's really important to keep this in mind, that you need to upload that in order for your application to be considered complete. So here's a small table of the items. You'll see kind of where you get those documents: performance metrics template, the implementation schedule, the budget template, the conflict of interest disclosure form, the certification of your employee residence, are all on Amplifund and can be downloaded and then uploaded. We don't have a standard MOU or linkage agreement. That would just be provided in the format that the applicant wants to use, but those can be uploaded within Amplifund. So you'll see when you go through all the way through and you have checks all the way through your application, the application can be submitted. And once you have done so, you'll get an alert that says you've submitted your application. You can download that application then. I recommend doing so just so you have a copy. But this is your verification that an application is submitted. You will also get an automated response from the system when that happens. Note that it will be the person who you identified at the very beginning as a primary contact for the system that will get that response. Applicants have until 2 p.m. Central Time, April 30th, 2024 to submit those applications. Everything needs to be uploaded, completed, and submitted by that point. After 2 p.m. on April 30th, 2024, you will be unable to submit and those applications will not be reviewed. So everything that's not completed and submitted in Amplifund by that time will not be reviewed. We will not be able to accept applications in any other way. Email, fax, in person, anything like that. You're only able to do it via the Amplifund system. So we do have some resources that there are links to all of these on how to register in the GATA portal, how to create a user account, how to register in Amplifund, how to complete the application, getting to know GATA, and sort of some basic information for those folks, going from getting pre-qualified for grants all the way through actually applying for grants at the last link, your recipe for grant success. So again, this slide deck will be on the website. I encourage everybody to look at all of these resources. There are also a number of resources such as mini webinar or mini video recordings for different topics that you might want to know both as an applicant and then eventually if you're selected for funding as a grantee. So if you go to r3.illinois.gov/resources, there are a variety of resources that I'd encourage all potential applicants to look into. And then there are ways to get support with Amplifund. This link leads to Zendesk, which is the Amplifund support desk. If you feel that you're having any difficulties with Amplifund or technical issues, you can report it there. And then that second link helps you with signing up for an account on the GATA site. And this just shows you sort of a little bit more of what Zendesk looks like. You can, click on these items in these little boxes to help out. And then if you think there is truly a technical issue that's you're having trouble with the system itself, you can submit a ticket where that red arrow is pointing down below. As I said at the very beginning, a NOFO has a very structured question and answer process to make sure that all potential applicants get the same information and are able to ask questions in a transparent and fair way. And so to do so, you'll need to send your question to cja.r3questions@illinois.gov. The last time that those questions will be accepted is 2 p.m. April 25th, 2024. That gives us an opportunity to release the last round of those questions publicly on April 30th, or I'm sorry, on April 26th, which is before the April 30th deadline. So that should give everybody an opportunity to review all of the questions before the deadline for application. Those questions and responses will be posted on the R3 website, at the ICEJA website where you found this NOFO to begin with, and on Amplifund under the NOFO. And so those questions, again, can be directed to cja.r3questions@illinois.gov, and they'll be answered by ICEJA staff. That link is here, and then I see Aisha Williams also put that into the chat, so thanks, Aisha. Once you submit your application, ICEJA staff will review those applications and check for compliance, check to make sure that your organization is pre-qualified and that you're eligible for funding. We'll also make sure that the application is eligible itself, that it proposes services in line with the eligibility requirements for this R3 program. We want to let everybody know that there are different stages in the system for the workflow of reviewing and scoring those applications. So it can be confusing because the way the system refers to it is that you're approved to move on to the next stage. Amplifund will send to the point of contact an auto email letting you know when you're going to be referred to the next stage in the workflow. And it at times has been seen has been kind of confused when you receive an email that says you're approved to move on. You think, oh, great, I got funding. That's not necessarily the case. You will receive an official letter from ICEJA if you're selected for funding. If you receive something from Amplifund, that is just an auto-generated message that just indicates that you're moving through the process. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be selected in the end. So I want to avoid confusion and let potential applicants know that this could happen. You could get this notification, and you shouldn't think that it's an award notice at that time. Oops, there we go. And this is just an example of that. You'll see that it has a status of approved. That doesn't mean you received funding. That means that it's been approved to move further in the process. So again, just some tips. As I said before, save often. Review that allowable award range in Appendix C of the NOFO before submitting your application. And please make sure that all of the points throughout the application where you enter your requested award amount all match up. You'll have to do it at the very beginning under that program information. You also have to enter it onto the budget. And those shouldn't be mismatched because that's the amount that you're requesting for the program. And so one of the things is, does your budget align with the program? You need those amounts to be consistent and the same all the way through. So make sure that all of that is the same by referring to that award range in the NOFO instructions. And as I said, make sure that you download and upload those required documents that you need to submit with your application. If you're having trouble accessing the website, we have noticed that some people might have a website filter up that can block it. So try to check that, try to use a different browser if that doesn't work. And then if nothing works, you can visit the support site and submit a ticket on that screenshot that I showed you earlier, so you can be assisted by the Zendesk help desk. All right, I'm going to pause before we get into more of the program information and see if there are any questions about submitting via Amplifund.
No questions in the chat, Mitch.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maureen. So the R3 program is focused on 5 program priorities identified by the establishing legislation: civil legal aid, economic development, reentry, violence prevention, and youth development. Your program, if you're applying for R3 funding, needs to address at least one of these 5 program priorities. You may address more than one. You could address all 5 if you have a broad program that you want to propose. But in order to be eligible, your program needs to clearly address at least one of those 5 program priorities. You should let the program kind of guide what you're intending to do. You know, look at the needs of the community, see what your community needs, but ultimately it needs to be in one of those 5 program priorities. Because this is a service delivery NOFO, we do allow capacity building activities. Again, it's one of the values of R3, but for this NOFO, no more than 10% of the full requested amount or $50,000, whichever is greater, can be put towards capacity building. The primary purpose of the funds should be service delivery. The capacity building can be things like training for your staff, can be things like contracting for, you know, needed bookkeeping or to develop a new system to keep your records. That's all allowable in the service of kind of maximizing your ability to manage your grant funds and perform your service delivery, but it should all be, again, in the service of the proposed program that you're submitting with this application. As I said at the beginning, we don't kind of micromanage you from the front end here. We largely leave the program specifics up to the applicant to establish. But that means that the burden is on the applicant to fully explain and justify what the program is intended to do and how the program will operate when you fill out your responses in the program narrative. So the program narrative will be asking, what's the need in your community? How do you know about that need? How do you plan to address the need? Give us details on the program. Give us details on how your program will evolve. All of those things should add together to give the reviewers of all of these applications a complete and thorough look at what your program will do and to justify the need for that program in your community. And again, because we don't have a lot of detail that we provide, we leave it up to the applicant to say, this is what my community needs. But then it's really, really crucial that the applicant really does justify that need and that program. When it comes to costs in your budget and in your budget narrative, the expenses that you're requesting for this program must be reasonable and must be clearly in support of the proposed program that you laid out in that program narrative. You can use your budget narratives. Any item of cost that you include on your budget should have a detailed narrative down below in the budget narrative section of the template that explains how each expense will be used in the context of the program and that lets us know how you calculated that expense. Again, you want to be, err on the side of providing more information rather than less, right? And give us a lot of detail on why you need each of those items to effectively carry out your program. This is especially important if it's an item that you think, that might be a little bit unusual, or that you think somebody might look at, like a merit reviewer of an application might look at it and say, well, why do they need this cost? You definitely want to justify that in your budget narrative. So the number one tip as we get into tips on how to complete your application is to read the instructions carefully. There is a lot of information in there. I know it can be a little bit intimidating, but we've got 2 months to do this, right? So there's a lot of information in there about program requirements, about what's allowable, about examples of some activities that may or may not be viable for this program. So please read that so you have a good sense of what is in bounds for this application. When it asks you for information on the program narrative and the budget or anything, don't just state it and move on. Really describe all of those dimensions that the questions are asking about, because if you put yourself in the shoes of somebody reading this application, you don't want anybody wondering. You want to be really clear and walk through step by step the responses to all of the questions that are being asked. Keep in mind the program values and the priorities that we've already discussed, knowing that reviewers will be asked to consider whether these applications really do embody those values and address those priorities. And then don't assume that reviewers know anything about your agency or your program. You need to give them the information in the application, because information outside of the application cannot be considered when reviewing the application that you've submitted to determine whether your organization is eligible for funding or not. And then finally, proofread your application prior to submission. We do instruct the reviewers that the content is key. The content is what's more important than the grammar or the spelling or anything like that. However, we also want to make sure that your meaning gets across clearly. And so please have somebody else read it and make sure that they do, that the application really does answer the questions well, and that there's no ambiguity or confusion that reviewers might have as they're reading your application. For the budget, we recommend that you kind of have a spreadsheet software of some sort to do your prep, like check numbers, make sure everything's in place, and then you can re-enter that information into our budget template. You do need to enter it into our budget template, but it may help just to kind of, by doing it separately and kind of just doing the math in another spreadsheet software, it allows you to make adjustments a little bit easier. And then you can take those final numbers once you're confident with them and add them into our template, and not have to worry too much about adjusting within that budget template. You need to consider how necessary and realistic and reasonable each cost is for your program. This is something that the reviewers will be looking at, and it's something that ICG will be looking at to determine, eligibility for those costs. So you can put in what you think is necessary and reasonable for your program, but you should justify that, and don't put in anything that really isn't necessary or isn't reasonable, just because you think you need to fill in some amount. Remember that you should direct the budget towards the program and not the other way around. You don't need to ask for the highest amount you possibly can. Many organizations are very successful by asking for just what their program that they envision needs, because it just it makes that request kind of more reasonable and narrows it down, rather than to try to think of things to fit into a budget just so that you can fill out the maximum amount. And then ensure that, again, that the costs and the narrative of the budget do align with your program. There shouldn't be anything in your budget that's just totally different, where somebody looks at that and says, I don't even understand why they're asking for that item, when it has nothing to do with the program and there's no reasoning provided for why that would be in there. As I said, you want to provide a lot of detail in the budget narrative, description of items and their costs, how they'll be used for the program, and how the costs were calculated, and distinguish between direct and indirect costs. This is something that's a little difficult sometimes, especially for organizations that haven't had grants before and haven't had to separate this out. Direct costs are those that can be directly assigned to the program. They're, staffing costs, a percentage of somebody's time where they work exclusively on the program, or supplies that are specifically for the program. Indirect costs are like the overhead for your organization as a whole. There's a way that you can allocate some of that overhead to the program. And if you want more information on this, you can ask or look up indirect costs in the federal guidance, which is at 2 CFR 200, which I think we have linked on our resources page, but that you can also just kind of Google. I'll leave it at that, because I don't want to go down a hole for indirect costs, but we're able to provide guidance on that if there are questions about that. As with the narrative, you want to proofread your budget and application prior to submission. And if you do have accounting staff or someone that helps you with your books, it is often helpful to work with somebody that can look specifically at the numbers, especially if the application is largely submitted by folks that are more kind of geared towards the program. Having somebody look at the numbers that it has a facility with that is often very helpful. For your performance metrics, the objectives and performance measures, again, that's another separate document that would be downloaded and then uploaded back to the system. There are two different sections for the performance metrics, and you want to make sure you complete both. One is the kind of overall mandatory program priority metrics. Each program priority that you're intending to serve is going to have their own, and our research and analysis unit has gone through to really identify those and has built that performance metrics template to include those mandatory performance metrics. So if you're serving, if you're doing violence prevention, you want to take those mandatory metrics and copy those into the table, because those are what we're asking for everybody to complete. We're doing that because, number one, it's helpful for us and for grantees, I think, to have some consistent metrics that we use across the board. And number two, because as part of the enacting legislation, the R3 program is required to go through an evaluation process to determine that the funds are being used effectively throughout the state. And it really helps us to do that evaluation. If we have consistent metrics that we can use across all grantees, we can collect in one place and use it for that statewide evaluation. There's also a spot on that template for metrics just related to your own specific proposed program. So we recognize that those overall metrics won't necessarily have your specific activities involved in it. And so this is the place for you to put that for, you know, the activities that your program proposes, you can put in that second section of the performance metrics template. We make a distinction between process objectives and outcome objectives. The process objectives are items related to the, you know, the process of carrying out your grant throughout the period. So this might be the number of youth that you reach out to during the course, or the number of people that attend your workforce development classes. They're not related to necessarily the outcomes that your program is achieving, but they help you gauge whether your program is being successful throughout the program. Then the outcome metrics are really things that you want to see at the end of the program. What kind of improvements in the lives of your participants would you like to see? Maybe that means a higher rate of high school graduation in your youth participants, or a, you know, better confidence in someone's ability to get a job as measured by a pre-test and a post-test of people that are coming into and out of your programming. Those are outcome metrics. So try to think of both. We want to see both process and outcome metrics as you're proposing your metrics on this template. And then, as with everything, right, the objectives that you want to reach should align with the program design that you already told us that you know, when you explained your application. And the measures that you use should align with those objectives. So if your objectives are that you want to see higher, you know, youth rates of high school graduation among your participants, then we want to see what percentage increase you're looking at, or how many more youth graduated over the course of the program. So that's kind of what we're looking at. And there's a lot more information on those performance metrics in the performance metrics template that our research and analysis colleagues developed. It's really important not to overlook this. Sometimes for some reason, people think of the, you know, there's the program narrative, and then of course you have to fill out the budget, and this performance metrics template kind of gets short shrift, right? We don't want that to be the case. We are instructing the reviewers to pay really close attention to this, to make sure that the outcomes that are being proposed and that the performance metrics are reasonable, and that they really do propose some quality improvement in the program participants, because ultimately we want these funds to be helpful to the communities. And this performance metrics template, the metrics that you propose and the outcomes that you propose really show us what that outcome is going to be. And so we're really, really focused on that, and we want all applicants to take that really seriously. So I've already covered a lot of this in the Amplifund section, but I just want to kind of reiterate that applications are completed and submitted in Amplifund. I said later, but that's because I moved the slide, and so I apologize. That was before. You'll need to complete all parts of the application and attach linkage agreements if it is applicable, if you're applying as a collaborative. And we do recommend that you submit in advance of the deadline. Of course, anytime before the deadline will be accepted, but to avoid any kind of last minute rushing, you know, there's always I'm ready to hit the button at 1:59 and then my computer decides to crash. We don't want that to happen to anybody. So it's recommended that you prepare yourself to submit in advance of that 2 p.m. deadline on April 30th, 2024. I will pause to see if there are any questions before I go into scoring and selection.
There's just one question. Will this recording be made available?
Absolutely. The slide deck and the recording will be on the website at r3.illinois.gov. So that will be on the website.
That's the only question we have.
Thanks, Maureen. Okay, so applications that you submit, as long as they are deemed eligible in that initial pass, will be scored based on the point values listed in the NOFO by a panel of reviewers. The programs will be selected based on those scores within your region and tier. And then we do note that the R3 board has final say on the approval of programs. And so, as you know, if there's a determination that we need to kind of go down a specific list to support stated program goals, the R3 board has that discretion. But in general, the programs will be scored within each region and tier, just from high score to low score as determined by those merit reviewers. As I said, the scoring is listed in the NOFO. There are a couple of items that you'll notice in there if you look at the scoring. One is local preference points. This is, I think, somewhat unique to the R3 program because the focus is so much on communities kind of helping themselves and working within communities. We want to prioritize those local organizations in the service delivery within their communities. So local organizations and local residents are kind of given priority in the point breakdown when these applications are scored. So let's see, there are a couple of slides out of order, I apologize. Applicants will receive points for their organization being located within an R3 zone, and that's for their primary headquarters as listed in the GATA site for being located within an R3 zone. You could also get points if you're applying as a collaborative, if at least half of the collaborative member organizations are located within an R3 zone. And so you'll notice if you go into the application and you say I'm applying as a collaborative, it'll ask you, okay, what are the addresses of your collaborative partners? That's going to help us determine if you get those extra points as local preference points. And it also encourages collaboration within those communities if you're anticipating applying as a collaborative. Then if you're not a collaborative, but you're a local organization, maybe your headquarters isn't located inside an R3 zone, you still have the opportunity to get some local preference points if a lot of your employees, at least half of your employees, reside in an R3 zone. And this is often the case if maybe you've got an organization that's located just outside of an R3 zone, but a number of your employees reside in that R3 zone or in an R3 zone in a surrounding area. You could still get those local preference points because you employ a lot of employees from that area. There is a form that you've got to fill out just to certify that this is the case, and that's also on Amplifund that's available to be downloaded. So let me kind of go back here. As I said, within each region and tier, the applicant with the highest number of points will be funded until all funds are exhausted. We might have some left over, let's say, in one region or tier after all the eligible grants are awarded. If that's the case, we could assign those remaining funds to another region or tier to try to use up all of the funds that we have available and make sure that funds don't go unused. We may also need to reduce awards even if an award is issued. If your application requested more than you were allowed, or if you've got some unallowable costs or something on that application, we may have to reduce those awards. It's also possible that awards could be released just based on the availability of funds. So maybe you put in an application for $100,000, we only had $50,000 left. We may go to you and ask, hey, are you okay? Can you scale down your program or something and take this $50,000 that's left over? And that would be offered to you. It wouldn't be required that you accept it. Understanding that sometimes programs can't necessarily be scaled down that way. But that's another reason why awards may be reduced. And then it is also possible that proposals that include unallowable activities or costs or don't meet the program requirements as laid out in the NOFO or in the R3 legislation could be deemed ineligible and rejected, either before or at the merit review stage. Any questions before I move on to the timeline?
Yes, we have one question that came in. If an organization is located in an R3 zone but wants to provide services in a different R3 zone, do you still get the preference points if the service area R3 zone is different from your zone?
Yes, as it's written, it just asks if you're in an R3 zone.
Then that's the only question.
Okay, thank you. So as far as the timeline goes, the NOFO was released today, March 1, 2024, as well as the technical assistance webinar. The recording will be posted on the website as soon as it generates. So most likely today or tomorrow, or well, our website people, most likely today or Monday is when the recording will be posted. The question submission deadline, as I said, you have until 2 p.m. on April 25th to submit your questions to cja.r3questions@illinois.gov. And then applications are due that following April 30th at 2 or before 2 p.m. 2024. We estimate that the R3 board will approve our recommended awards in June. And we also will need to have our ICJA's budget committee approve those recommended designations as well. We also estimate that to happen in June. And the performance period right now is scheduled for July 1, 2024 to June 30, 2025. A note on that, we do anticipate that successful programs after that first 12-month period may be extended for up to 36 months. So it's important to think about as you're developing this application, what your programming might look like if it was able to go beyond 12 months. We're only asking you specifically for a 12-month program right now and for a 12-month budget right now. That's per our GATA guidelines that that give us that initial 12-month period of performance. But we do like to give where we can to eligible organizations, give some extra stability by saying, okay, you can have 36 months without having to kind of cross your fingers every 12 months to see if there's going to be, a renewal or if there's going to be another NOFO. So keep that in mind as you're going through the application. There is a question related to that on the application, so stay tuned for that. But that initial period of performance is just that 12-month period. I've already said this, so I won't belabor that point. I will say, just to reiterate, that the R3 website at r3.illinois.gov has a resources section. There are a number of different kind of pages in that resource section. There's, like I said, little mini recordings of different areas that you might be interested in looking at. There's some general videos that have been produced in the past for ICJA NOFOs that have good information on budgeting and things of that nature. There's Spanish language materials if you want to see the NOFO instructions or the questions in Spanish. And all of the kind of basic resources for the NOFO are there. So all of that information is located under that resources section. You can also look at the eligibility page of the r3.illinois.gov, which I mentioned earlier, to look at the map to determine if you're eligible. And I encourage everybody to look at that website and find all of those good resources on there. And I think, oh, I'm sorry, one more thing. If an applicant may be, a current or former applicant or grant recipient with ICJA or have some other, connection, I want to inform everybody it's very important that this is a competitive notice of funding opportunity. Our grant guidelines are very clear that we need to make this NOFO as fair and equitable and competitive as possible. We can't allow anybody to have any kind of extra information that not everybody who could potentially be an applicant for this NOFO has. So that's why, as I said, we'll direct all questions that are answered will be included in the questions document that's uploaded and posted to the website every single week. They'll all be answered through that central email inbox. It is important that you not ask any questions or receive any other help from anybody else other than the people responding via that cja.r3questions email address. So even if you might know a grant specialist or someone at ICEJA or even at another state agency, any questions about this NOFO need to go through that official chain so that we can collect them and publish them for all to see. And that is all I have here. Again, is the email address, which is also in the chat. If there are any other questions, please put them in the chat now. And if not, I will stop the recording and we'll end for the day. So I'll give just a few more minutes for any last minute questions to be put in the chat. And as I'm not seeing anything, I'd just like to thank all of you again for your time, for coming into what I know was a heavy webinar. Please do feel free to ask the questions, to visit the website, and if you'd like to revisit the recording once it's available, or see the slide deck that contains all the links that you've been able to see on the screen thus far, those should be up early next week, if not before. All right, so with that, I see no other, I see no other questions. Thank you all. I will stop the recording.